It's the Kyle Hyman Show on Redeemer Radio.
This is Kyle Hyman, and joining us to talk about being single for a greater purpose is Luanne Zurlo. Thanks for being here, Luanne.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. Reading your book and some of the stuff you're talking about in here, you talk about there being an increase in the single life recently. If you just look at the numbers around the world, population, less people are getting married. Is this because there's an increase to the vocation of the single life, or is it other issues that are contributing?
Frankly, I think it's mostly because of other issues, a lot of them negative. Just the kind of the state of our culture, the state of formation. I think there are fewer people able to enter into sacramental marriages. But I think amidst this rubble, God is calling more to the dedicated single vocation.
And you say that you discerned that God was calling you to be a lay single. How did you discern that?
Oh, goodness. Years on my knees, just through a lot of prayer, discernment. I was really blessed because I was able to take a sabbatical I've had a number of intense jobs, a pretty intense career, and I was able to spend 4 months in quiet in Rome, kind of doing some study and reflection. And I was in my mid-40s at that point. And after, many years dating and having some opportunities to marry, but realizing just that wasn't what God was calling me to. Was also open to the religious life and just did not feel in my heart that that was what God was calling me to. And then gradually it started to dawn on me, maybe God is calling me to himself. And, at first that was a daunting prospect, but gradually as I started to kind of let that I internalized that idea more and more and prayed about it, it gave me great peace. And when I finally just absolutely embraced it and said, I am yours, that was a profoundly peaceful moment. And it's given me a joy ever since, even through hard times.
How did you see that as being something different than the religious life, being a religious sister or being a nun?
I would say being a dedicated single, and that's the term I like to use for it. There's a lot of words you can use to describe it, and I think there's a lot of confusion over what it is. But the key difference is you are really out there. It's like you're out there in an extreme way in the world, as opposed to religious who really are called to leaven the world from without, if you will. And now we do obviously have community sisters that are very active in the apostle in the world, but really your special consecration by the church beyond everyone, we obviously all have baptismal. We're consecrated to our baptismal promises. This is a special one in church eyes when you're religious, to consecrate the world from without, if you will, from your community. Whereas a lay person, at the core of what it means to be in the lay state is you are amidst the world. And so as a dedicated single person, it's potentially a very unstructured life. You don't have the norms of religious life or ordained life or marriage life. When you're married, and particularly when you have a family, there are just structures you have to live by virtue of that vocation. As a dedicated single person, you really have to create that structure yourself with the discernment of the Holy Spirit, absolutely.
So does that look different from one dedicated single person to the next, or are there some similarities or some things does the church give any guidance for what that would look like?
The church gives very little guidance at all. I think this is an area that needs to be explored more theologically. I would say the greatest similarity between a dedicated single and another vocation would be that of either a hermit or particularly like a consecrated virgin, which is another vocation it's a vocation that has started from the earliest days of the church. I mean, our earliest beautiful martyrs, Lucy, Agnes, Agatha, they were virgin martyrs, but effectively our earliest consecrated virgins. And so the difference with dedicated single is I think most of the people I know, you tend to have more lay-oriented or secular careers, and you're less connected directly to your local diocese and your local bishop. As a consecrated virgin, you are taking vows and vows of obedience to your bishop. dedicated singles, we necessarily, by this vocation, cannot take vows of obedience or poverty because we are not obedient in the strictest sense to a human being or vows of poverty. We are required to support ourselves. So in terms of objective poverty, you have to be very prudent. And so the one vow we're all called to be chaste in our state of life. But the one vow a dedicated single can make is that of celibacy, which is a call to be Christ alone throughout your life, and hence celibate as a result of that call to Christ.
In what kind of a situation do you make these vows? Is this something that you do with a parish priest? Is it something that you do with a bishop, or is it just something that you do on your own?
All.
Okay.
It could be. Now, you have to be a bit careful. Vows mean something very specific in canon law terms. And what's really important to me, and I think to those of us who might discern this vocation, is we do so within the structure of the Catholic Church. Now, as we just mentioned, the Catholic Church doesn't have a lot of guidance or structure around this, but what the Catholic Church does provide us through its wisdom of its canon law is really some defined structure around what vows are. You have solemn versus simple, perpetual versus temporary. And so vows help you, and they're necessarily private versus public vows. A dedicated single does not take public vows in the church. So this is not a vocation that you wear on the sleeve or people will automatically know this. It's something that if you're living your life and your vocation well, they'll discern that over time, knowing you. There's something different about this person. There's some joy. There's something there, but it's a hidden vocation, and those vows are necessarily private. And they can be taken. I took mine, for example, with my spiritual director, who's a Dominican priest, in private. Or you can do private promises, even just to yourself and God. But taking some kind of step like that, a vow, even just to one person or privately to God, a promise, it gives you some emotional stability. We're all emotionally, potentially fickle sometimes. And when you kind of verbalize it or take a little bit more of an action step, it solidifies it. It makes it easier sometimes, or it gives you strength to live through that vocation. We're all meant to give our heart away. If you don't give your heart away, you're never going to be at complete peace. We're hardwired to give our heart away. And so you give it away to God as a religious or ordained priest, or in this case, as someone who takes a private vow to Christ, or you give your heart away to a spouse, to God, but through a spouse. And so for those, as we started this segment out, there's been an explosion of single people, particularly in the developed world, an explosion. And as a result, I think there's been an explosion. It's one of the many reasons why we have such an increase in anxiety and unhappiness out there, and desire to fulfill that anxiety with many other less good things, if you will. And it's because people aren't giving their hearts away.
So true. We're talking with Luanne Zurlo. The book is Single for a Greater Purpose, A Hidden Joy in the Catholic Church. And I feel like the single life, the dedicated single life, has a reputation of being a consolation prize or an I give up vocation instead of something that God would actually be calling a person to. How does it get that reputation? How did we mess up this, explicitly describing this as a vocation?
Oh, goodness. I think partly what was in an inadvertent kind of result of the church really fully appreciating and recognizing the beauty and importance of the vocation of marriage in the lay state. The lay state's been kind of naturally equated with marriage. And I think that's part of it. I think part of it is, frankly, celibacy in perfect chastity have been somewhat, they've clearly been devalued by culture. We all know that. We live in a sexual swamp, if you will. But I would even argue they've been devalued by the church. I mean, we don't have to go through what's been going on in the last couple of years. And so insofar as you devalue celibacy, which is an extraordinarily fruitful state, and indeed for most of the history of the church, it was viewed as an objectively higher state, then you kind of devalue the state of those who have chosen celibacy, whether through or discerned it. You don't really choose it. I would argue you respond to a call to it. So, and necessarily, this is a more I think, a vocation that is suited to a certain personality and characteristic type. And it's not one I think most people realize early on. I don't think many of us grow up thinking, oh, I pray to get married and have a family or respond to religious life. It's a vocation many respond to a little bit later. Having said that, it's not to say it's a lesser vocation or a default vocation. Those women and men I know who have responded to this call are truly amongst the happiest I know. Mm-hmm. But it takes quite a leap of faith.
Well, and what is the process? Because I feel like there's also many people that are in the single state that are more like begrudging their state of life and lamenting that they don't have a spouse or haven't found their vocation, quote unquote. What is the process of moving from that state to finding the joy in that calling?
Oh, that's the $1 million question. And as you said, I see so much of that. And that was myself for a number of years. And many view this as that second best default vocation. It takes time on the knees. And I say often your greatest crosses turn out to be your greatest blessings. And that which you at first don't want ultimately is what makes you happiest and holiest. And I would say, how do you go from one mindset to another? It's truly, I'll say it again, giving your heart away and turning your will over to God, truly. When you sit in begrudgment of something, you really haven't turned your will over to God. And God really knows what's best for us. As hard as that is to believe, He really does know what is best for us. And that's to me, that's the whole spiritual life, is learning how to really embrace that, not only in your head, but in your heart and all the cells of your body.
Do you think that some of this is a fear of loneliness, that we can't imagine being happy and joyful and being, quote unquote, alone?
Absolutely. Now, I don't talk much about loneliness in my book, Single for a Greater Purpose, in that it's just not been so much of an issue for me, partly because I think friendship is an important element of this vocation. And so I've been blessed with a number of wonderful friends and family. And I also think a lot of people that have this vocation probably tend to be more introverted in nature and desire that solitude and silence, that quiet time. It's kind of a Mary Martha vocation. You tend to be very active in your job or your apostolate in the world, but then you also need that Mary time. You need a lot of time, I keep saying, on your knees. And I think it tends to be more contemplative souls that have this vocation. You're contemplative, but also active. And so you don't, frankly, I don't know, I just don't have time to be lonely, but that's not to say that isn't a challenge. And that's also, one can live into their loneliness. So That's a whole other topic.
Sure. Well, people should check out the book. It's called Single for a Greater Purpose, A Hidden Joy in the Catholic Church. It's available from Sophia Press and wherever you get books. Thank you so much, Luanne. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.